Thank you for joining us this evening. You are now attending the webinar entitled Armenian Genocide, Armenian Identity, and Life in the United States. Our leader for this session is Bedross Matossian, Professor of History and Hymen Rosenberg Professor in Judaic Studies, Department of History, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'd also like to acknowledge Jessica Friday, who is here. Hi, Jess, from Saucon Valley High School. She's out of Hellerton, Pennsylvania. Jessica is a member of this year's Teacher Advisory Council who will serve as our TA for tonight's session. She has already been very active in the chat, sharing thoughts and asking questions of you all. So again, Jess, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Bedross Matossian is a professor of modern Middle East history in the Department of History at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Born and raised in Jerusalem, he is a graduate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he began his graduate studies in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies. He completed his PhD in Middle East history in the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University in 2008. From 2008 to 2010, he was a lecturer of Middle East history in the Faculty of History at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. For the spring quarter 2014, he was appointed as a Dumanian visiting professor in the University of Chicago. His areas of interest include ethnic politics in the Middle East, inter-ethnic violence in the Ottoman Empire, Palestinian history, and the history of Armenian Genocide. Currently, he is the vice chair of the Department of History. He is also president of the Society for Armenian Studies. He serves on the board of directors of multiple international educational institutions and on the editorial board of multiple journals, the most prominent of which is the flagship journal of the field, the International Journal of Middle Eastern Studies. He is also the series editor of Armenians in the Modern and Early Modern World, published by I.B. Tauris and Bloomsbury Press. To our network of teachers, both nationally and internationally, and without further ado, I present to you our scholar and leader for this session, Dr. Bedross Matossian. Bedross, we're honored to have you with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the generous introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the National Humanities Center for making this important webinar available, specifically a day before the annual 109th annual commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. Just in your introduction, Mike, just wanted to update that I was the president of the Society for Armenian Studies. I should update my website on the university website. So I'd like to start this webinar with a quote from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan today, President of Turkey, who was quoted by an Azerbaijani news outlet on his way from visiting Iraq. And he says, "It's time," and I quote, "it's time to put aside baseless ideas. It is always better to act on realities of the time than to act on fictional historical narratives that have nothing to do with reality." End quote. So the baseless ideas that he's talking about is the Armenian Genocide, which President Erdogan, along with the Turkish state, have been, since the genocide, have been denying the veracity of the Armenian Genocide and pouring millions of dollars into denial through political figures, through university, education, culture center, and many other dimensions. So, as you can see at the the image on the first slide shows a demonstration during the Armenian Genocide. I think this is the centennial, where you would see four flags actually. You would see the American flag, the flag of Armenia, and the flag of the Republic of Artsakh, which was ethnically cleansed last year from its indigenous population. And this is happening, this demonstration is from 2015, and the flag of Canada. And the flags are important because it also demonstrates the allegiance and loyalty of the Armenian Americans towards issues dealing with American issues, with issues dealing with Armenia and issues dealing with Artsakh and the ethnic cleansing within Artsakh. So, first, we're going to start defining the concept of genocide. What is the concept of genocide? The author of the concept of genocide was the Jewish jurist by the name of Raphael Lemkin, who coined the concept of genocide. He was shocked by the horrors that the Armenians have experienced, and Lemkin wrote that he was shocked by the juxtaposition, and I quote, "A nation was killed and guilty persons were set free. Why is a man punished when he kills another man? Why is the killing of a million lesser crime than the killing of a single individual?" So he went around looking for a specific concept to define such major mass murders. He looked into vandalism, he looked into barbarity, but then he settled on the word genocide, which comes from Greek. Genos means nation, ethnic group, and side means Greek genocide. And Raphael Lemkin's concept became the basis according to which the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on 9 December 1948 as a General Assembly Resolution 260. The convention entered into force on 12 January 1951. The detailed and quite technical definition is as follows. The contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law which they undertake to prevent and to punish. Article 2. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Article 3. The following acts shall be punishable. A. Genocide. B. Conspiracy to commit genocide. C. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide. And D. Attempt to commit genocide. And finally, E. Complicity of genocide. One thing we have to remember that the Genocide Convention was a result of a compromise between the major powers, specifically United States and Russia and Soviet Union, in order to cover the crimes that have been perpetrated within these both countries in the past. They removed specifically political groups and other groups that do not fit within this category. I'm going to start my slide on the genocide by providing the quote from the most important American figure in the Ottoman Empire, the American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire during the Armenian Genocide, Henry Morgenthau, who wrote extensively on the suffering of the Armenians and tried to raise his voice with the State Department in order to interfere on behalf of the Armenians, but realism overcame idealism, and the United States did not interfere politically. And he says, "I'm confident the whole history of human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared with the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1950. Of course, at the time, the concept of genocide did not exist. Different journalists, different political figures referred to the Armenian genocide as the Armenian Holocaust or the Armenian massacres, among many other concepts defining the magnitude of the crime. So let's start about the Armenians. Who are the Armenians? Armenians are an ancient people that existed in the pre-first century Common Era. They had significant territory historically, and they were the first nation to adopt Christianity in 301 AD. They played a significant role in the region, as you can see in the map, and modern day Armenia was a former Soviet republic. And the dark orange here represents the modern day Armenia, and all this section represent Greater Armenia of historical Armenia, whereby Armenians were living until it was the historical land of Armenians until World War One. Also, in this section here, as you can see, which is called Adana, Tarsus on the Mediterranean Sea, you can see another section of what was in the past Cilicia, which was a medieval kingdom, which played an important role during the Crusades period, and it was also suffered a fate of what their other co-religionists suffered in the greater Armenian provinces. So because the genocide took place in the Ottoman Empire, I'm going to discuss about the life of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. Armenians lived in the Ottoman Empire. Most of them lived in the Ottoman Empire until the end of the World War I, until their extermination. Armenians in the Ottoman Empire were considered as second-class citizens of the Ottoman Empire. Realizing the Ottoman condition and situation in the global economic and political transformation, and with the decline of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman authorities decided that it was time to reform the internal situation and condition within the Ottoman Empire in order to be able to compete with the European power. They wanted to reform the bureaucracy and the military in order to be able to sustain, and the economy, the global economic and political transformation. So they initiated what came to be known as the Tanzimat reforms, which are called reordering reforms. But before that, Armenians used to live in a semi-autonomous context or system that came to be known as the community system, the millet system, as you can see. They were merchants, industrialists, and artists played a dominant role in the economy of the Ottoman Empire. But most of these important figures were concentrated or situated in the Ottoman capital, Constantinople or Istanbul. So this first phase of the Tanzimat reforms took place between 1839 and 1876. Some of these reforms were under the pressure of the European powers to improve the lot of the non-Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, and eventually these reforms aimed to provide lay representation of the non-Muslim communities in the internal affairs of their own communities, because their communities were represented by religious leaders. And eventually you have the drafting and the ratification of what came to be known as the Armenian Constitution in 1863, which was the result of the Armenian constitutional movement, which emerged in the first half of the 19th century, which aimed at bringing the ideas of liberty, freedom, equality, and apply it to the internal Armenian community. Most of these students have studied in the West and came to the Ottoman Empire with ideas of the West and political currents within the West. And eventually it led to major Renaissance period for the Armenians, where you had an outpouring of newspapers, of the opening of an internal public sphere in which Armenians discussed about the future of their presence in the Ottoman Empire. They considered themselves part and parcel as Ottoman Armenians and demonstrated their loyalty to the Ottoman regime. But after that, after the Armenian constitutional movement, other Armenians also played an important role, such as Grigor Odyan, for the ratification of the Ottoman Constitution in 1876, which became the first, and the opening of the Ottoman Parliament, which became the first political system within the Middle East that adhered to representation and constitutionalism in order, again, to better and improve the condition of the Ottoman Empire. The aim of the Ottoman constitutionalists were to improve and protect the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire. However, with the Russian-Turkish War of 1877-78, the Ottomans were defeated, a major defeat, and eventually the Sultan, who came into power with promises of fulfilling the constitution, deleted the constitution and abrogated the parliament and started a despotic regime that lasted from 1878 to 1909. While the situation of the Armenians in the capital was improving, the condition of the Armenians in the eastern provinces of the empire was deteriorating. For decades, Armenians in the eastern provinces, where they were the majority, and the majority of them, meaning majority of Armenians, lived in the eastern provinces, and they were a majority in some of the provinces. These were the lands of historical Armenia. They were suffering of depredation, double taxation, double taxation, persecution, and other means of degradation. And eventually they began complaining to the Ottoman government, to their leadership and the Armenian Patriarch and the Armenian National Assembly, that something needs to be done in order to improve our situation. After the Ottoman Russo-Turkish War of 1877-78, the Treaty of San Stefano was signed, and Article 16 assured that the Russians are going to remain in sections of eastern Turkey or historic Armenia to make sure that the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan Abdulhamid II would initiate a massive reform in order to improve the lot of the Armenians. However, Germany and Britain were not happy with the San Stefano Agreement, and they convened another treaty or another Congress named the Congress of Berlin, 1878, and now Article 16 was reversed to Article 61 with much less guarantees that anything was going to happen in order to improve the condition of the Armenians in the eastern provinces. And it is only after the 1878 that the Armenian question, which is the question of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and the future of their security within the historical lands in the Ottoman Empire, was under huge suspicion. Hence, it is after 1878 that the Armenian question became an international question. When the Armenian political regime, when the Armenian Patriarchate and other civil figures realized that the Armenian question was not going to be solved in diplomatic manners, some Armenians now resorted to Armenian revolutionary movement in order to put pressure on the Sultan, meaning the king of the Ottoman Empire, in order to improve the condition of the Armenian provinces. Of course, the Armenian revolutionaries were not acting alone. They were the byproduct of other revolutionary groups existing in Russia, Russian revolutionary groups, Bulgarian revolutionary groups, other Balkan revolutionary groups, who all of them had the similar aims. Some wanted to gain independence from the Ottoman Empire. Others wanted autonomy and reform within the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, and most of that was the aim of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. When the Armenian revolutionary groups emerged, Ottoman Empire, the leadership panicked, and instead of coming into terms and initiating and improving the lot of Armenians through reforms, they initiated a major breakdown on Armenians within the eastern provinces, which resulted in the first wave of violence inflicted on the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire. Here we see a map of the Armenian provinces. As you can see, in the north you have Sivas, then Erzurum, and then Harpert, and then Van, around the Lake Van, and then Bitlis, and then Diyarbakir. And all of these areas were habitated, were populated by Armenians, and in some areas Armenians consisted majority. And these are the areas which belonged to the Greater Armenia, historical Armenian period. So the first phase of massacres came to be known as the Hamidian massacres, called after Abdulhamid II, in which within 2 years, 1894, 1896, between 100 to 300,000 Armenians were killed systematically as part of a policy initiated by Sultan Abdulhamid II in order to preserve the status quo in the eastern provinces. It wasn't a genocide because there is a difference between massacre and genocide. Massacres usually aim to preserve status quo and discipline specific targeted population, where genocide aims to exterminate in whole or in part the targeted population. In most cases of genocide, usually it targets the minority groups. So between 100 to 300,000 Armenians were killed. Aid for Armenian victims became the first international mission of the American Red Cross. So one thing we have to remember, that Armenian genocide is also part and parcel of American foreign policy and American history. Today, the National Archives hosts more than 20,000 documents dealing with the Armenian three phases of Armenian massacres: the Hamidian massacres, the 1909 Adana massacres, and the Armenian genocide. These eyewitness accounts mostly came from diplomats, but also from missionaries, Protestant missionaries, who were there on the ground and witnessed the large waves of violence that were inflicted on the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire. The Near East Relief would raise more than $100 million in assistance to the Armenians. And as you can see, the early massacres, the Hamidian massacres, were extensively reported in American press. This is on the left, you see the New York Times, and these are sections from March 16, 1895. The title is Persecution of Armenians, and the second one is Kurdish Fiendish Cruelty. Eventually, during this period where the Hamidian massacres were taking place, there was another group, the group that were behind the Ottoman Constitution, the group that were behind the Ottoman Parliament. Those were called the Young Ottomans, and the descendants of these Young Ottomans came to be known as the Young Turks. Young Turks were in exile, banished by Abdulhamid II, the Sultan, because they questioned his despotic regime, and it was in the exile that they met other Armenians who had similar aim, other Armenians, other Albanians, other Greeks, other ethnicities, ethnic groups who were residing in the exile in cities such as Paris, London, Cairo, Geneva, and many other European cities. These groups were influenced by raging ideological currents within Europe or even within Russia, such as populism, biological materialism, nationalism, democracy, constitutionalism, and other or positivism, for example, and other ideas. And eventually, the Young Turks were able to initiate a revolution in 1908 and were able to reinstate the parliament and the constitution. And this was the period on which I wrote a lengthy book called Shattered Dreams of Revolution. The dreams were shattered because for the Armenians, they hoped that finally they were able to detach themselves and free from the clutches of the Hamidian regime. They hoped that the new constitution would protect them from the violence they endured under the ancien regime. And they believe now that with its new era of the revolution, which was based on the ahistorical model of the French Revolution, the trilogy of liberty, fraternity, and equality, aimed at bringing new idea of what Ottomanism entailed, kind of an ideology of an Americanism, whereby everyone was going to be the loyal Ottoman citizens, but protect their own identities. But eventually, these dreams were shattered, I argue in the book, because there was major contradiction between what the Young Turks viewed the future of the empire and what the other ethnic groups, the minorities, viewed of the Ottoman Empire. While the Young Turks were more conservative, they believed in centralization of the Ottoman Empire. Other groups believed in decentralization, administrative decentralization of the Ottoman Empire on the same system as the American federal system. And usually they also discuss the American federal system as a way to copy, as a way to go in order to preserve the Ottoman integrity of the Ottoman Empire. So eventually, after 8 to 9 months of the Young Turk Revolution, there is the second wave of violence that was inflicted on the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire. This was the Adana massacres of 1909, which took place in the southern eastern section of the Ottoman Empire, above the Mediterranean here, which took place in the province of Adana. And Adana's massacres took place as a result of different factors, beginning from economic factors, political factors, tensions within this province of Adana, but more importantly, the public sphere that was created after the Young Turk Revolution, but also the counter-revolution took place in Constantinople, Istanbul, in order to by the conservative and the liberals, in order to get rid of the Young Turks and their major party that was governing, the Committee of Union and Progress. So many revolutions happen, and the answer for these revolutions are counter-revolutions. And this is what happened in the case of the Ottoman Empire. But the counter-revolution resulted in an extreme change within the policy of the Ottoman Empire towards the large freedoms that were given to all the ethnic groups. So twin massacres took place in the province of Adana. In 1909, Armenian hopes were dashed. Reactionary forces in the city of Adana carried out a massacre of Armenians as part of an attempt to re-establish the power of the previous regime. Two waves of massacres took place, April 14 to 16, 1909, and the second one is April 25 to 27, 1909, whereby more than 20,000 Armenians were killed and 2,000 Muslims were killed as part of what came to be known as the Adana massacres. After the Adana massacres, Armenians were shocked because justice was not achieved. The perpetrators were not properly punished, and this was kind of the major period that demonstrated to the Armenians that the future is grim and we're heading to the wrong direction. Eventually, the Balkan Wars began in 1912, 1913. Armenians realized that it is the time to reignite the internationalization of the Armenian question in order to bring reform and better the lot of their co-religionists in the eastern provinces who were suffering under depredation, double taxation, persecution by the Kurdish tribes and other refugees who came from the Balkans and the Caucasus. So when the Committee of Union and Progress realized that they've lost the war, the Balkan Wars of 1912, 1913, they initiated a coup d'etat, which came to be known as the coup d'etat of the Young Turks, and they hijacked the government and established a despotic regime, which was going to rule the Ottoman Empire through the Armenian Genocide, which became the authors and the architects of the Armenian Genocide, and the last move by the Armenians to bring reform in the Ottoman Empire was the Armenian Reform Project of 1913-14, which aimed to bring European administrators on the Armenian 6 Armenian provinces. That's how it was called: Sivas, Trabzon on the sea, Black Sea, Erzurum, Van with the Lake Van, Bitlis, and Diyarbakir. But the project failed because the Ottoman Empire entered World War I on the side of Germany. I'm going to stop here for the first phase of questions. The second phase will discuss the Armenian Genocide, and the third part of this presentation will discuss Armenian American identity and within the United States. Questions,
Thank you.
please.
Yes, thank you so much, Bedross. And again, I encourage everyone, if you should have any questions throughout the evening, please enter them in the managed Q&A chat. I see the audience chat is very active as always. So again, thank you everyone for weighing in. We have two questions from Kyle. I'll ask the first question. Were the Armenians a kingdom or polity directly conquered by the Ottoman Empire, or were they already subsumed within another polity, empire, etc., which then the Ottomans conquered?
Of course, Armenians were native to these lands from the beginning. They witnessed many rules. Even before the formation of the Ottoman Empire, there were many other political entities, the Seljuks and other Mamluks, and not Mamluks, but the Seljuks and other princedoms or kingdoms. But the last entity that existed within the region of the Ottoman Empire was the Kingdom of Cilicia, which lasted from 1198 to 1375. And after the collapse of the Cilician Kingdom, which was an Armenian kingdom, until 1918, Armenians did not experience any type of independence. Of course, in different sections within the Ottoman Empire, such as Zeytun, Armenians had autonomous status, and it is only in the 19th century, with the reforms and centralization of the Ottoman government's power on the Ottoman Empire, there began the Armenian autonomy in different regions began to be conquered and began to be removed. But Armenians did not have, within the Ottoman Empire, were not a political kingdom. They did not have kingdom, but they had principles. Sorry, yes, they had princes. Sorry, not principles, princes. Also in the region of under the Russian control. For example, the five princes of Artsakh, which is today Nagorno-Karabakh, which last year suffered a major ethnic cleansing. And it was until 1918 that Armenia, part of the eastern section of the Ottoman Empire and part of the Russian Armenia, became an independent republic, which only lasted 2 years.
Very good. Thank you for that. Thank you. The second question, in materials I use for teaching, they mention rumors of Christians massacring Muslims in the Balkans, and as part of the loss of much European territory for the Ottoman Empire, and these rumors led to increasing anti-Armenian attitudes and feeding into fuel for violence, like the Hymen massacres. Is that something you see as a significant part or factor as well?
Of course, Muslims in the Balkans suffered ethnic cleansing and persecution by Christians in the Balkans as part of their national ideology, or as part of their nation state building, where thousands of Muslims from the Balkans and from Caucasus actually were ethnically cleansed and brought to the Ottoman Empire and were under the control of the Refugee Commission in the Ottoman Empire, and many of them were settled in Armenian inhabited areas in order to change the demographic balance so that no Armenian was going to be a majority in any city. It was a politically demographic engineering, politically motivated move, and eventually suffering persecution by other Christians. Some of them also directed their anger towards the Armenians in the three phases of violence that was targeted towards the Armenians: the Hamidian massacres, the Adana massacres, and we're going to see the Armenian Genocide.
Very, very good. And thanks to everyone who are entering questions. I will tell you that we're going to hold off now. We will come back to those questions in the interest of time. And so we'll proceed on. And during our next break, I'll bring some more questions to your attention. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to continue with World War I. So, of course, in order to understand why Ottoman Empire entered World War I, we have to also understand the European imperialism. Of course, European powers were not angels, I have to say. They had their own calculation as part of 19th century imperialism. Their second wave of imperialism was dictated by the Industrial Revolution, and they ended up colonizing most of Africa, all of Africa, except for Liberia and Abyssinia, Ethiopia today. They ended up colonizing sections of South Asia or Southeast Asia, and they ended up also bringing China to its knees as a result of the Boxer Revolution, as a result of the two Opium Wars. So all of them were eyeing on the Ottoman Empire to divide the empire among themselves. So this is one of the factors that Ottoman Empire entered World War I in order not to become prey to the imperial powers. Second, they were convinced by the Germans that they had to be part of the Ottoman Empire. They were to be part of World War I in order to be part of the general German ambition of conquering major areas around the globe. So we have to also mention that towards the 19th century, German military was extremely close to the Ottoman Empire, to the Ottoman leadership and the army. They played a dominant role in directing the army. Major generals were there, major figures were there in order to direct the Ottoman theater of war and make sure that the Ottomans would win the war against Russia. So, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I in October 1914. The first attack began in the east. This is extremely important, where the Ottomans wanted and aimed at conquering Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan. And Baku was the strategic center, specifically for the oil production, which is, as I said, today's capital of Azerbaijan. But back then, Azerbaijan did not exist, but it was an important hub for business and for Armenian intellectuals, Azerbaijani or Tatar back then intellectuals, and all of them were living within the same city. But that campaign, which was led by the Minister of War, Enver Pasha, was doomed to fail. It was unsuccessful because some Armenians on the Russian part also participated against the Ottomans. They were defeated. The Ottomans were defeated soundly at the Battle of Sarıkamış. The Ottomans here now blamed Armenians for siding with the Russians, even though a few hundred or a few thousand Armenians were in one of the units, and the Young Turks began a campaign to portray the Armenians as a kind of fifth column, a threat to the state. And this created a long current of what historians called affective disposition. And affective disposition is emotional word of creation, us versus them. And in the following map, we're going to see the theater of World War I in the Ottoman Empire. So, as you can see, the Russian Empire on the top, and you can see the dark green. These were the areas where the Ottoman troops wanted to capture Baku on the Caspian Sea. They were defeated and retreated, and the Russians were able to capture Erzurum in February 1916, a major blow to the Ottomans. And on the other side, under Bulgaria, you would see the Sea of Marmara. You would see the British and the Anzac troop. Anzac are the Australian and New Zealand troops who came from New Zealand and Australia to take part in the war against the Ottomans. They were defeated, and that was kind of a victory for the Ottomans, but it didn't last long. And then there was the other front, which was from Egypt and the Arab provinces. These were the British who were able to mobilize the Arabs and eventually move upward towards the Anatolian section. As you can see, the arrows show the British capture of Jerusalem took place in 1917. The British capture of Mosul took place in Iraq 1918, and British capture of Baghdad took place in March 1917. So under this pressure from Russia, the British and the Australian and Anzac, of course, the British used a lot of Indian troops within their bringing from India, and India was under the colonization of the British. The Ottomans realized that they had to get rid of one of the major problems, which has become a pain in the neck for the Ottomans. That was the Armenian question. And supposedly, in order to save the Armenians from World War I, they had to deport them. That was the euphemism. Deportation is a euphemism for genocide. Deport them from the eastern provinces down to Syria, to the desert, to Aleppo and other areas, Syria, into the desert of Deir Zor, and Deir Zor is considered by Armenians as the Auschwitz of the Armenian genocide. Who were the most important three principles of the Armenian genocide? I found this picture on the web page on one of the social networks. It's the image of the three major perpetrators of the Armenian genocide: Enver Pasha, who is the Minister of War; Talat Pasha, the Chief Architect of the Armenian genocide, Minister of Interior; and Jamal Pasha, who was Minister of Navy and the commander of the Fourth Army, responsible of the Arab provinces. What's interesting about this image? It's written that if you buy the three cups together, you will have a discount. So this is how the three key architects of the Armenian genocide are revered within Turkey today, and they're considered as national heroes. So how the preparation for the genocide took place? There were multiple phases on the genocide, despite the fact that some historians want to find the document that proves the Armenian genocide. I argue that such a document does not exist, because perpetrators or criminals do not leave documents. If you want to kill 2,000 people, you're not going to send a document saying, I am going to kill 2,000 people. Perpetrators, genociders, mass killers do not leave proofs. So, the special group of Turks and Kurds, often made up of released prisoners, were created to carry out massacres. A special organization was formed, but this organization was formed in 1913 to combat imperial powers such as Russia and the other imperial powers, Italy and the British and others. But a good section of this special organization targeted Armenians. They were special organization were formed by prisoners and other people. Most Armenian men were drafted into the army, then disarmed and put into labor camps. And the major aim of these labor camps, it was to continue building the Baghdad Railroad, which was a major ambition by the British to connect Berlin to Baghdad. And Baghdad was was under major competition, both by the British and the Germans. And if the Germans had succeeded in finishing that Berlin-Baghdad railroad, it would have given them an upper hand to move troops and equipment to the eastern part of the Arab provinces, to today's Middle East. So most Armenians were drafted in order to prevent any type of opposition. Community leaders arrested on April 24, 1915, and were put to death soon after. Around 300 community leaders were arrested, and that's why Armenians commemorate the Armenian genocide as part of April 24, 1915. And now, with its able-bodied men in the army and without the leadership, the Armenian population was defenseless and more than vulnerable. The genocide had two phases, or of course we can add a third phase, but these two phases starts with the following. Young Turks' liquidation plan targeted only the population of the 6 eastern provinces considered to be the Armenians' historical lands. This took place in the spring-fall 1915. And the way in which this phase began is by arresting all the Armenian men, either sending them to the labor battalions or killing them outside the villages. And thousands of Armenian men were killed in this manner. The second phase of the genocide, that began February to December 1960s, targeted the survivors who remained from the first phase. And of course, the survivors were taken through deportation, and there were multiple caravans of Armenians who were deported from these 6 provinces. Let's say if 5,000 Armenians were deported, only 300 or 400 reached to the second phase. All right? So if, let's say, 200,000 Armenians were deported, maybe 20,000 or 30,000 have arrived to the second phase. So the second phase targeted these survivors in addition to Cilicia, which I said was the area in which the Adana massacres took place, and it was in the past the place where the Armenian kingdom was established, and were taken to concentration camps in Syria or Upper Mesopotamia. The decision to destroy these remaining deportees was taken in late February or early March 1916 and affected 500,000 surviving deportees who had reached Syria and Mesopotamia at least 6 months earlier. And the last phase of the genocide, which was not carried out by the Committee of Union and Progress, who were in exile, some of them were assassinated by Armenians, took place when the Kemalist troops kicked out Armenians from their historical land, and now a purification of the new Turkish land or Ottoman land began, and this purification took the characteristics of social engineering, demographic engineering, and homogenization of Anatolia from its indigenous Armenian population. In order to visualize the Armenian genocide, I think this map provides an interesting information. When you see up the Black Sea area, many Armenians, in order to save money, they were drowned. They were thrown into the Black Sea and drowned there. Others came all the way down from the provinces, as you can see. The arrows show Armenians going down, and the aim was to take them to the Deir Zor area, which is a major big desert within Syria today, and all of those, majority of Armenians actually were killed or died on the way, which was in a systematic manner, and whoever survived then arrived into the section here in Syria where they were put into concentration camps. As you can see, the small dots, small circular dots, represent the concentration camps in which Armenians were put. And eventually, while some of them survived, the majority were sent and were killed in the area of Deir Zor. Of course, the Armenian genocide was widely reported in the international press. The New York Times, for example, reported on the Armenian plight extensively, with 165 articles published in 1915 alone, describing the atrocities as, and I quote, systematic and a campaign of race extermination, despite the fact that Henry Morgenthau tried to mobilize his government. The American ambassador in Constantinople tried to mobilize his government in order to save Armenians. Nothing of that sort happened. You can see titles of articles: 800,000 Armenians counted destroyed. The second one, 1,000,000 Armenians killed or in exile. So what's the result? What was the result? The following maps, two maps, shows the presence of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. So the dark orange color on the left presents the major concentration of the Armenians in the 6 provinces, and the lighter color shows Armenian presence in different regions of the other Ottoman empires. Sivas, for example, had 225,000 Armenians, Erzurum 215,000 Armenians, Memuret el-Aziz 200,000 Armenians, Van 197,000. But then in the post-genocide period in 1926, out of 2,125,000 Armenians survived in small portions in Sivas, Memuret el-Aziz, Bitlis, and eventually in the course of decades under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's period, most of the Armenians moved or removed or left the region or some of them even were assimilated in the region of the Ottoman Empire. Many Armenians were abducted. Many Armenians were forcefully converted. Children were taken. Rape was consistent during the Armenian Genocide of women. Some women chose suicide. There was major brutality, and again, many people participated from the mob in the genocide, not only motivated by ideology, not only motivated by Turkish nationalism. There was a host of factors. Some people didn't care about Turkish nationalism. For them, confiscating, stealing Armenian property was a fast route to become rich. So mainly, I argue that the Turkish bourgeoisie that was established during the Republican period in 1923 was based on Armenian properties that were confiscated with the presumption that it was going to return back to Armenians when they returned back from the deportation that they were sent to for safety condition. Of course, all of this is euphemism. The aim was to confiscate because there was also economic envy towards the success of Armenians in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, whereby Armenians became major industrialists, major holders of companies, major producers, and eventually created an economic envy. So religion I argue, is not the main motivation, though it could be within one of the motivations. Motivations include nationalism, religion, peer pressure, and many other aspects of the genocide. So what's the aftermath? The aftermath is that by World War I, before World War I, there were 2,538 Armenian churches, 451 monasteries, and nearly 2,000 Armenian schools. Today, outside of Istanbul, Constantinople, Armenians possess 6 churches, no monasteries, and no schools. Nearly all movable property was either confiscated by the government, looted by mobs, or seized during the death marches. And by 1923, the 3,000-year-old civilization virtually ceased to exist. And 1.5 million Armenians, more than half of the Armenian population in the historic homeland, were decimated. I'm going to stop here before entering into the section on Armenian Americans and ready for questions.
Okay. Question from Jason. How much of a role did Ottoman attempts to industrialize their economy have in the removal of Armenians? You touched on that a little bit earlier, but I wanted to make sure I brought Jason's question to your attention. How much of a role did Ottoman attempts to industrialize their economy have in the removal of Armenians?
Yeah, very good question, Jason, because part of this national ideology prior World War I was nationalization of economy, the idea of nationalization of economy. The nationalization of economy is a Western European ideology, which the Young Turks adopted, by which we argue that all the industries within the Ottoman Empire had to be nationalized, which aimed at boycotting Armenian businesses, Greek businesses, and eventually taking over all through force, by the means of force, during World War I, taking over all these businesses, as I said earlier, which played a dominant role in creating a new Turkish bourgeoisie, new Turkish economy. You can argue that Turkish economy, to a certain extent, is based on the Ottoman economy, on the Armenian economy within the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Would you contribute the Holocaust to be a continuation from the Armenian Genocide, since there is a quote from Hitler saying, "Who remembers the Armenians today?" Well, that's from Lilith. It's a question about the continuation of the atrocities from the Armenian Genocide and the connection to the Holocaust.
Of course, we have to understand that any unpunished genocide leads to other genocides. Impunity emboldens other perpetrators to commit acts of genocide against other groups. Never again was a motto after the Holocaust, yet Cambodia took place, yet Bangladesh genocide took place, yet Guatemalan genocide took place, yet Darfur, yet Rwanda, Bosnia, Uyghur genocide, and many other genocides, including the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, which we witnessed last year. But Stefan Ehrig, who is a prominent historian on German history and Armenian genocide, demonstrates that many of the German officers who were advised the Ottoman Empire during World War I and who were on the ground in the Ottoman Empire, not many, maybe some, also played an important role during the Armenian genocide, during the Holocaust, sorry. So those officers were on the ground directing the Ottoman army and becoming some kind of genocidaire advisors, played an important role during the Armenian genocide.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll ask this question, and I want to be mindful of our time as well. I have 7 after the hour, and so we only have a few more minutes. But the question Ellen had is I've heard of modern organizations called the Young Turks, which is an American news and commentary program. Can you comment on the contemporary use of this title and its meaning or implications, if you're familiar with that?
Very good. Yes, I'm familiar with the progressive Cenk Uygur. I think his name is Progressive Radio. I think the radio is very progressive, but the name is problematic. Imagine if you have a radio show named either as a name of a paramilitary organization, SS, named SS, or named Janjaweed, or named Interahamwe, for example, in the case of the Rwandan genocide. So it's highly problematic, and I think the host of that show should rethink twice, or maybe start thinking, because it doesn't sound well, even though his intentions are good. But his radio show called Young Turks is highly problematic. Imagine if I have a radio show called SS, the paramilitary organization in the Armenian, in the case of Holocaust, which played an important role in the Holocaust. So,
thank you for answering that. It's about 9 after the hour now, and so for everyone who's entered the questions, thank you so much. We're going to proceed on in the interest of time, and if we have time at the end, we will respond to the questions that are in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So, Armenians in America. The Armenian migration to the United States began centuries ago, shortly after the first British colonists arrived in North America. Due to time limit, I'm not going to enter into detail. The first recorded Armenian to visit North America was Martin the Armenian from Iran. He was in the business of tobacco and tobacco grower, and who settled in Jamestown, Virginia in 1968. Eventually, more and more Armenians started coming. By 1770s, over 70 Armenians had settled in the colonies, and by 1880s, their number reached 1,500. Many were young male students of the American evangelical mission spread throughout the Ottoman Empire. So the missionaries who played a dominant role in the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, educating many people, but were also successful in converting Armenians into Protestantism, played an important role specifically in educating Armenians, specifically in the province of Harput, in one of the Armenian provinces. The number of Armenians who migrated to the United States from 1820 to 1898 is estimated around 4,000, and we have to think that the reason, some of the reasons were economic reasons for their immigration, but mostly had to do with the violence that were inflicted on them, and that has to do with the Hamidian massacres. And before the start of World War I, you have more than 60,000 Armenians living in the United States, except for Fresno, California, which had suitable land for farming because most of Armenians were farmers and peasants. The earlier Armenian immigrants predominantly settled in the northeastern industrial centers such as New York City, Providence, Worcester, and Boston. If you think where are the two oldest communities of Armenians, these would be Fresno, California, and Worcester, Massachusetts. And this wave in the 19th and the 20th century, there were actually three waves took place. Mostly Western Armenians from the region that is now present part. The beginning wave was mostly from Western Armenia, for Western Armenians from the region that is now part of Eastern Turkey. So the first wave was direct result of the Armenian persecution by the Ottoman Empire during the three phases of violence that were inflicted on the Armenians. These were the Hamidian massacres, the 1909 massacres, and the genocide. The second wave was of Armenian migration in the United States, occurred in Soviet Armenia post-World War II. After the U.S. Immigration Act of 1965, it became easier to immigrate to the United States because the quota system was eliminated. And you know, the Immigration Act of 1961 abolished quotas and opened the doors to those who can contribute most to this country, to its growth, to its strength, to its spirit. This was a quote. And the new law created a preference system that focused on immigrant skills and family relations with citizens or U.S. residents, and it was passed by the President Lyndon Johnson. It eliminated national origin, race, and ancestry as basis for immigration, making discrimination against obtaining visas illegal. And as a matter of fact, when Armenians came to this country in the 1920s, they were discriminated at the beginning, but then eventually they were welcomed. The third wave, the last wave of immigration to the United States began during the 1980s, in part due to the Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh conflict with Azerbaijan and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Most Armenians came to this country as U.S. refugees. Now, when we talk about Armenian identity, the first generation Armenian Americans who were born in the United States were able to adopt hybrid identity from their parents, but also from the local culture. Armenians have had relative success in assimilating to life in the United States. They were successful, they were hardworking, specifically as the beginning because they didn't have any other choice but to survive and succeed in life within the United States, especially because areas such as California are already home to many other diaspora communities. And because California is a multicultural state, because its weather is better than any other state within the United States, Armenians were drawn there from the beginning. So United States is home today to both Eastern and Western Armenians, often living in the same area. Another slide of demonstration during the Armenian Genocide. This wasn't during the Armenian Genocide, sorry, this was during the blockade of the Lachin Corridor that connected Armenians of Artsakh to the Republic of Armenia, and the blockade lasted 9 months, which was classic genocide by attrition. Armenians starved to death. They were barred from the basic necessities of life: bread, water, and medicine. So, what unites Armenian? The most substantial factor uniting Armenian Americans together today is the Armenian cause, as it unites all Armenians around the globe. And Armenian cause today has a different meaning, has a different understanding than it used to be in the 19th century. 19th century was about improving the lives of the Armenians in the eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire, or Greater Armenia, or historic homeland. The Armenian cause today is a transnational cause that focuses on what diasporans can do to recognition of the Armenian genocide, to help the republics of Armenia and Artsakh. And Armenian identity challenges in the US are very much political. With a history of conflict and forced migration, it is difficult to separate Armenian personal from the political. Through political and identity struggles, Armenians in America have come together and create an identity centered around political activism and the defending of the homeland. Armenian Americans are loyal elements of the United States. They are part and parcel of the American political system, but they also are loyal to their motherland, to the homeland. The efforts of the Armenian lobby mostly meet these challenges, and the two most prominent Armenian lobbying groups are the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, headquartered in DC, with many branches around the United States, and the Armenian Assembly of America, again, headquartered in DC. And there is another lobbying group called Armenian Committee of America. Armenian genocide recognition was one of the most pronounced and visible cultural challenges that Armenians faced in the United States. By Biden recognized the Armenian genocide. The Senate and the House of Representatives recognized the Armenian genocide, but still denial is very rife within the United States, denial of the Armenian genocide by Turkish professors, by Turkish embassy, by Turkish organizations. The aim is to obfuscate the mind and ideology, the mind and the opinion of Americans within the United States that Armenian genocide is a matter of debate. There are two sides to the story that they argue, and you have to hear us. Imagine if you say there are two sides to the Holocaust. There are two sides to the Rwandan genocide. There are two sides to the Bosnian genocide. And here there are the emblems of the major Armenian lobbies, the Armenian National Committee and the Armenian Assembly of America. Both of them are dedicated to the Armenian cause. And again, the cause has changed today, specifically in the past year. As a matter of fact, when you have the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh taking place, depopulation of the Armenians of Artsakh, which is known also as Nagorno-Karabakh, by the Azerbaijani forces from their historic homeland, during which everyone in the West was watching what was happening without any interference or without any condemnation of the despotic regime of Azerbaijan. Armenians thrive in the United States today. They are an important part and parcel of the American cultural web. There are more than 21 Armenian schools in the United States, but the concentration is in California. 16 of them are in California. There are more than 13 Armenian chairs within the United States universities, many of them Ivy League universities, and 11 Armenian studies program in the US, the aim of which to educate Americans with the rich history of the Armenians from the ancient period to the modern times, but also educate Americans to the one of the most horrendous phases that befell on Armenians, namely the Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Committee of Union and Progress. Most Americans are Orthodox, adhere to the Armenian Apostolic Church, the largest Oriental Orthodox Church in the United States, but there are a significant number of Armenians who adhere to the Catholic Church. They're called Catholic Armenians. Also, there are also evangelist Armenians adhering to the Evangelist Church. Armenians have a rich culture in the United States. They have their own newspapers. The first newspaper was published in New Jersey, Jersey City in 1888 called Arekag, means the sun. And today and since then there have been over 300 newspapers published in the United States. And these newspapers were bilingual, sometimes Armenian, English and Armenian at the same time, but sometimes Armenian version and English version. Here you have the Armenian Weekly published in Watertown, and you have the Armenian version of Armenian Weekly, which is the Hymen. Then you have the Mirror Spectator published in Watertown too, and you have the California Courier and the Armenian Observer published in California. Armenians in America excelled in arts, sciences, academia, politics, sports, military, and business. These are the descendants of a generation that came barefooted in the United States and suffered discrimination, but were able to overcome all the hardships. They worked very hard in order to establish new societies, new communities, and keep the fire burning, the fire of Armenian identity, the fire of the memories of the Armenian Genocide, and the fire of the past. There are more than 90 charitable, economic, and political, professional, trade, volunteer, culture, education, student, and religious organizations in the United States. And all these organizations are very active in preserving their communities. There are more than 120 Armenian churches, the majority of which are Gregorian, while the rest are Catholic and evangelicals. And the majority of the churches are found in California, followed by Massachusetts and New York. And one word I'd like to say that, again, Armenian Americans have a very rich culture, a very rich tradition, very rich language and literature, and they have played an important role in American history in the modern period. There are many famous figures, Armenian figures such as Vartan Grigorian, who just passed away a few years ago. He was the director of the New York Public Library, president of Brown University, and then Carnegie Corporation. You have Eric Bogosian, who's a playwright and performance artist. You have Cher, the singer. You have Arshil Gorky, the famous painter, and you have Nubar Afeyan, the co-founder of Moderna, Kurt Krikorian, who was the founding father of Las Vegas. You have Armenians as filmmakers such as Ruben Mamoulian. You have Armenians in the military such as Paul Robert Ignatius, who was the Secretary of the Navy between 1967 and 1969 and was the Assistant Secretary of Defense during the Lyndon Johnson administration. Armenians were in music. Alan Hovanes, a famous classical Armenian composer, and many other figures. In science, for example, you had the inventor of MRI, Raymond Damadian. In sports, you have Andrea Agassi, Jerry Tarkanian, college basketball coach known for his time at the UNLV, member of the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. And last but not least, you have Pulitzer Prize winning authors such as William Saroyan and Peter Balakian and Ben Baghdigian, who was a political writer, Michael Arlen, who was a novelist, and last but not least, Alicia Giragosyan, who was a Nobel Prize nominee. Thank you very much, Mike and Aden.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Virtual applause throughout the chat. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for just deepening our knowledge of the impact of the genocide on survivors, identity formation, and the struggle of Armenians for recognition of the Armenian Genocide here in the United States and beyond. Thank you for everyone. I have to tell you, I appreciate your questions. I've copied your questions, and I have your email addresses as well. So I will forward them to Bedross, and hopefully we can get back with you with some responses. There was just so much information, so we weren't able to answer all the questions, but just thank you for being active in the chat. You know, throughout this entire season, Our numbers have grown considerably. You all are showing up. You're loyal. You're faithful. You're engaging with one another. You're building community from within the chat. And just know that we appreciate all of you. Special thanks to our friends, to our partners, co-sponsors, primary source for arranging, setting up, helping to organize this webinar. We appreciate you and your entire team and look forward to continuing to work with you all. Special thanks to Jessica Friday, who did an outstanding job in the audience chat tonight, sharing information as our TA for the evening, and she's continuing the impactful work that she's doing for the Teacher Advisory Council. Moving ahead, I encourage you all to keep up with all that's happening at the National Humanities Center. Just visit nationalhumanitiescenter.org for additional information and our various social media channels. I'd also encourage you to support the humanities education programs. The NHC education programs provide a bridge between the academic world and the working classroom. Your gift, no matter how modest, can open up a world of ideas for teachers and rekindle their enthusiasm for the subjects they teach by providing the knowledge and the tools they and their students need to make a difference. All right, our final webinar for the season will be held on May 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The enduring impact of the American Dust Bowl, adaptation to environmental catastrophe and environmental refugees. You know the time. We will be here again, May 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I look forward to seeing you all. There were a few questions about the slideshow. We will add them to the resources that are available. We will also have the on-demand video for you all. So if I can answer any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. There were a few questions that came in tonight. We interacted in the managed Q&A, and I will be attentive and responsive to those. But again, I wish you all the best. The weekend will be here soon. So again, enjoy the remainder of your week. Take care and be well.